What if the place you feared most didn't just exist in stories but in reality? Zara, a fearless vlogger, ventured into a graveyard that no one dared speak of, a place cursed by silence and forgotten by time. But as she stepped into graveyard, sign, she didn't just encounter the shadows of the past, she faced something far more terrifying. What was waiting for her in the darkness? Her last recording would reveal the chilling truth. Stay tuned, because this is the kind of horror you don't want to miss. Zara had always chased fear, not just for the thrill, but for the truth behind it. She wasn't like the hundreds of other horror vloggers faking reactions in dim rooms or staging jump scares for easy views. Her approach was different, raw, immersive, and unflinching. When she stepped into abandoned hospitals, dark forests, or decrepit mansions, she did it with one goal in mind: to strip fear down to its bones and face it. Her subscribers admired her for it, even envied her. They called her brave. Some even called her reckless, but Zara didn't mind the labels. She thrived on what fear left behind in people's eyes: the questions, the unease, the disbelief. It was during a live Q&A stream that someone first mentioned Graveyard Number 9. A user with a name that disappeared from the chat shortly after had typed, "Why don't you try spending a night in Graveyard Number 9? If you think fear is real, that place will make you believe." At first, Zara thought it was another internet challenge. But something about the way it was phrased, the sudden vanishing of the user and the silence that followed, it all seemed off. She looked it up. Graveyard Number 9 was located on the outskirts of an old town that barely appeared on modern maps, a place that was once used by the nearby city in the 1970s, but was later shut down without any formal notice. The official records didn't list the reason for its closure. No vandalism, no desecration, no government acquisition, just closed. She dug deeper. The only mentions of it now were scattered forum posts, old dust-covered threads from years ago. Each had a warning. Don't go there. Don't speak its name. One person even claimed that it didn't exist on GPS anymore, not because of a glitch, but because something there didn't want to be found. That, of course, only fueled Zara's curiosity. She didn't believe in curses or haunted places. She believed in legends, yes, but only to the extent that they revealed people's fears. The rest, she assumed, were products of overactive imaginations, or local myths spun over generations. Still, the lack of concrete information about Graveyard Number 9 was unsettling. There were no pictures, no coordinates, no YouTube videos. It was as if the internet, which had everything, deliberately skipped over this one spot. She managed to get directions from a retired caretaker of a nearby cemetery. He didn't want to talk about it. In fact, the moment she mentioned number 9, he grew pale, muttered something under his breath and walked away. But he left behind a map. Hand-drawn. Simple. It had a route marked with a black line that curved through forest trails, crossed a broken bridge, and stopped at a single dot with a circle drawn around it. No labels, no names. Zara packed her bag that same night. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not because she wanted to keep it secret, but because she wanted the full, uninterrupted experience. One night, just her camera, an audio recorder, a flashlight, and enough battery power to capture everything. She planned to spend from dusk till dawn in the graveyard. No editing, no commentary, just the raw experience. She titled the folder, on her drive, Graveyard Raw. She even prepped her intro. "This is Zara, and tonight I'm going to face what others fear in silence." When she arrived near the location, even the air felt wrong. The trees looked heavier, as if they leaned inward. There were no birds, no rustling leaves. Even her footsteps felt muffled. She passed a rusted gate without hinges and followed the caretaker's map closely. The deeper she went, the less her phone worked. No signal, no maps, no time updates. By the time she found the entrance, if it could be called that, her watch had frozen at 6:44 p.m. The sun hadn't fully set, but the shadows were long and motionless. She took a deep breath, turned on her camera, and stepped inside Graveyard. The people of the town avoided graveyard number 9, but they rarely spoke about it. There were the typical rumors, whispers in the dark corners of the local diner or at the bar, but nothing concrete. It wasn't the kind of place that had a notorious past or a history filled with dark deeds. No, it was the silence around it that made it so unnerving. And when people did talk, their voices dropped to barely audible whispers, like saying the name too loudly might invite something unwanted into their lives. At first, Zara dismissed the warnings. Local legends, she thought, were part of the charm. She had visited countless places shrouded in mystery, abandoned asylums, forgotten villages, and empty, crumbling theaters. And in every one of those places, people had tried to warn her. She'd even been given those same hushed, cautious looks. "Don't go there," they said. "It's not safe." But Zara always found that the real story behind a place wasn't in the warnings. It was in the courage to experience it firsthand. But graveyard number 9 was different. The first hint that something was wrong came when she tried to find someone willing to talk about it. At the diner, the older folks who had lived in the town all their lives avoided her gaze when she brought it up. The waitress, who had been serving her coffee just moments before, changed the topic instantly, as if the mention of the graveyard had triggered a kind of mental block. Zara tried to press to ask questions, but people grew uncomfortable. The air thickened and their words came slower, more cautious. She moved on to the librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses who had been working there for decades. At first, the woman seemed intrigued by Zara's interest in the place. But once Zara mentioned graveyard number 9, her demeanor shifted, the color draining from her face. She quickly apologized and made an excuse to leave, claiming that she needed to take a break. Before she left, she whispered something Zara would never forget. "Some stories are best left untold." Zara was confused. She wasn't sure if these reactions were due to genuine fear, or if they were simply rooted in the town's love for keeping things buried. Still, the words stuck with her. What was so terrifying about a graveyard that people couldn't even talk about it? Was there something she was missing? Something more sinister? She decided to dig deeper. She went online, reading through countless posts, forums, and articles, trying to piece together what others had experienced. But there were very few mentions, only fragmented, cryptic messages. Someone had written about hearing footsteps in the distance. Others mentioned hearing whispers in the dead of night. And some even claimed they had seen figures moving between the gravestones. But no one had dared to provide any specifics. No one had ever posted a video or photo of the place, and those who had gone there either refused to speak about it afterward, or in some cases, simply disappeared. Zara found a thread from a few years ago, a post from a man who had visited the graveyard and claimed to have recorded a strange audio, something that couldn't be explained. But when Zara tried to reach out to the user for more details, his account was deleted and the message was gone. She scrolled through the comments looking for anyone who might have saved the recording, but there was nothing. It was as if the internet had wiped all traces of it away. This only made Zara more determined. Whatever lay there, it was powerful enough to make people shut down, to make them forget. So she pressed on. She found a few town records in the local archives, but they were scarce. Some documents mentioned the cemetery's early days, how it had been established in the 1800s, how people had come from all around to bury their loved ones. But then, suddenly, the records stopped in 1978. No explanation, no formal closure. Just a brief note. Graveyard closed pending further investigation. What investigation? No one seemed to know. It was as if the people had simply erased the place from memory. That was the final push Zara needed. She knew she had to go. She could feel it, deep down. There was something important waiting for her, there. Maybe it was the truth, or maybe it was the dark, unknowable force that had driven the town to bury the story. But she had to find out, no matter the cost. Zara arrived at the outskirts of graveyard number 9, just as twilight began to settle over the landscape. The air felt thick, dense in a way that made it hard to breathe. The weight of the trees around her seemed heavier than usual, and the silence was almost unnatural. Not even the wind stirred, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She had experienced many eerie places, but this one felt different, as though something in the atmosphere knew she had crossed into forbidden territory. The gate to the graveyard was rusted and hanging at a sharp angle, almost as though it had been abandoned mid-repair. The cemetery itself was nestled deep within a thick cluster of overgrown trees, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the setting sun. Zara's flashlight flickered momentarily as she approached the entrance. A strange chill ran down her spine, but she pushed it aside, reminding herself that she had prepared for this. She had come here to prove that fear could be conquered, that it was just a product of the mind. As she stepped inside, the sound of gravel crunching under her boots echoed far too loudly in the stillness. It was the only sound. Zara paused, her flashlight scanning the surroundings. The graves were old, weathered, and many were half sunken into the ground, their inscriptions barely legible. Some had cracked open, exposing the bones within, as though the earth itself had grown restless. She set up her camera on a nearby tombstone, adjusting the angle to capture the entrance. With her recorder in hand, she began narrating, casually speaking to her audience as though she were in the safety of her own home. She spoke about the history of Graveyard Number 9, recounting the town's eerie past, the rumors, and the strange disappearance of the caretakers. As she spoke, she felt the air grow heavier, the temperature dropping slightly, and a feeling of unease settled in her chest. Her voice trembled for a split second as she looked around, noticing something out of place. Among the decaying headstones, she saw a small figure barely visible in the growing dark. It stood motionless at the far end of the graveyard, barely visible behind a cluster of stones. Zara squinted, but the figure didn't move. She chalked it up to a trick of the light or her mind playing games. After all, this was what she was here for, wasn't it? To prove that the mind could distort reality and turn harmless shadows into monsters. Still, Zara's heart raced as she continued with the video, forcing her focus back to the lens. It wasn't until a few minutes later that she realized she could still feel the presence of someone watching her. Her skin crawled as she turned the camera to capture the area where the figure had been standing, but there was no one there. Only empty, forgotten graves. She wasn't sure what it was, but the sensation of being observed lingered in her gut. With each step, each moment she spent in the graveyard, the unease grew until it felt suffocating. Zara told herself to breathe, to shake it off. She was here to film an experience, not to let her imagination take control. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the growing sense that she wasn't alone. As the night deepened, Zara found herself inching closer to the center of the graveyard. The shadows stretched longer, swallowing up the small pool of light cast by her flashlight. She moved with purpose, narrating to her camera, trying to push past the building anxiety gnawing at her. It was then that she came upon something that made her stop in her tracks. A gravestone, almost completely covered in ivy, had something odd about it. It wasn't the shape or age, it was the mirror. There, leaning against the stone, stood a small, weathered mirror, its surface strangely clear and untouched by the elements. It was out of place, too pristine, too perfect in the middle of this decaying graveyard. Zara's breath caught in her throat. She moved closer, her feet dragging slightly as though the earth itself resisted her steps. The mirror reflected nothing but darkness at first, but as Zara moved, she caught her own reflection staring back at her. For a moment, the image seemed fine, just her hair messy, her expression anxious. But then something happened. The reflection, just for a split second, smiled. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Zara froze. The smile wasn't hers. Her heart skipped a beat. She stepped back, blinking rapidly, but when she looked again, the reflection was gone. Her mind raced. It was impossible. She could see her own face clearly, yet the smile had been so wrong. Her stomach churned. She touched her face as though trying to confirm that it was still hers. The mirror felt colder now, the air around her suddenly thick with tension. There was a discomfort that settled over her, one that she couldn't shake. The smile had felt like a warning, like something was playing with her. It wasn't just the mirror that unnerved her. It was the realization that she had been watched. Zara shook her head. She muttered to herself, "It's just a mirror, just a trick of the light." But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. She couldn't pull herself away from it. She needed to look again. But she didn't. Something deep within her told her not to. She had already seen too much. The minutes passed slowly, stretching out as Zara fought to regain her composure. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and despite herself, she glanced back at the mirror. Something about it kept drawing her in. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to turn away, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She kept her focus trained on the mirror, almost daring it to do something, anything, to prove that it was just an illusion. As she stared into it, she thought she saw something in the reflection. Something moving. Her eyes widened as she noticed the faintest outline of a figure standing just behind her. She whirled around, her heart pounding in her chest, but the graveyard remained silent. No one was there. Her pulse quickened, and she took a few steps back, her breath hitching. She turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there. But this time, it wasn't standing behind her. It was her. The reflection of herself, only it wasn't quite her. The reflection in the mirror looked calm, serene, almost as if it had resigned itself to something. Something dark. The eyes of the figure in the glass were wide open, unblinking. Zara's reflection, however, blinked. She felt a cold, creeping dread crawl up her spine. Then came the whisper. A voice that wasn't hers, not even close. It was faint, like a breeze, but it was unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come here." Zara jumped, her heart hammering. She spun around again, but there was nothing behind her. No one. The graveyard remained eerily still. But the voice hadn't been her imagination. She knew that. The voice, like the reflection, felt real, felt alive. Her hands shook as she reached for the recorder, trying to capture what was happening. She spoke into the mic, her voice strained. This is too much. Something's wrong here. Something's trying to speak to me." Her words were cut short by another whisper, but this time it was closer, almost in her ear. "You saw her. Now you belong to us." Zara's breath caught in her throat. Panic gripped her. She backed away from the mirror, but the whispers followed her. As the night grew darker, the atmosphere in the graveyard thickened. The oppressive silence that had initially filled the air was now replaced by a low, steady hum. It was subtle at first, like a vibration in the ground, but it grew louder, almost as if the earth itself were alive. Zara's nerves were frayed. She clutched the recorder tightly, her eyes darting around, searching for the source of the strange noise, but there was nothing in sight. Then, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The graveyard, which had seemed so still, now felt as though it were moving, as though the earth itself were breathing in time with her. The air grew heavier with each passing minute. Her flashlight flickered, and for a moment, everything was plunged into darkness. When the light came back on, Zara gasped. Standing before her was a figure. At first she thought it was another trick of her mind, some phantom conjured by her growing fear. But no, this figure was real. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her face obscured by a veil of long, dark hair that fell in front of her face. The woman stood motionless, her head tilted slightly to one side as if she were waiting for something. Zara's voice caught in her throat. She backed up slowly, but the woman didn't move. She was no longer sure whether the woman was a part of the graveyard or something far worse. Zara looked down at the recorder, but when she glanced up again, the figure had disappeared. But the whispers had not stopped. In fact, they had grown louder, more urgent. They were all around her now. Zara couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, a warning, a demand. It felt like the graveyard was closing in on her, the walls of reality pushing against her mind, until all she could hear was the sound of her own panicked breathing. With trembling hands, Zara tried to turn and leave, but the ground shifted beneath her once more. It was as though the graveyard was holding her in place. The whispers now felt like they were coming from inside her own head, loud and unrelenting. It was then that Zara realized with growing horror that the graveyard wasn't just a place. It was alive and it didn't want her to leave.